Inflation creeping upwards, interest rates stubbornly high, a flirtation with recession, business sentiment the lowest level since the first lockdown, and now the pound plunges in value and the cost of government borrowing in the international bond markets is higher than after Liz Truss's ill-fated mini-budget. Has the short-lived former Prime Minister now been vindicated? And is it Labour that have in fact crashed the economy? Who better to ask than the Telegraph columnist, economics supremo, and co-star of the hugely popular Planet Normal podcast, Liam Halligan. Liam, really good to see you. A plunging pound, low growth, and high cost of borrowing. What should we be most worried about?
Well, the first thing to say, Mark, is congratulations to you on launching this channel. I wish you a huge amount of success. I think you're a very talented and interesting broadcaster, and I'm sure you're going to amass lots of viewers and a big following. So, chapeau
Thank you, Liam.
to you. When it comes to what's going on financial markets, what's worth remembering is some of what I'm about to say may sound like gobbledygook, and I'll try and make it not sound like gobbledygook, because that's the stock in trade of good journalism, isn't it? Explaining complex issues in a clear way. But why this is important, and when I talk about bond markets and gilt yields, what I'm talking about is the cost to the government of borrowing money from financial markets, from big pension funds, insurance companies that have lots of our savings, and they channel money into investment. Sometimes they invest in, rather risky things to get bigger returns, but their base investments, their sort of solid investments, are generally what are called sovereign debt. That is the debt of governments around the world. And British government debt, by tradition, they're called gilts, because they used to have a gilt gold edge around the certificate. That's where the phrase good as gold comes from. If you lend money to the British government, you get your money back. It's as good as gold. The thing is, though, Mark, that gilts on international capital markets, they haven't got the reputation that they used to have. That's because over many years now, it's not just a Labour thing, over many years the British government's been borrowing very, very heavily. That's because our economy has been growing slowly, and when an economy grows slowly, it doesn't generate the tax revenues it ordinarily generates, and it needs more spending because more people are out of work on benefits, and the economy tends to get more support from politicians because they want to be seen to be doing the right thing, being nice people when the economy is growing slowly. The problem is the UK economy is growing very, very slowly, and it's been growing slowly since certainly the end of the COVID lockdown. It's not just a British thing, but for now the focus is on the UK, because since the Tories left office, with the tax burden already at a 70-year high and government debt already, equivalent to 100% of GDP, the whole stock of debt the government owes to international markets is as big as the whole economy in a single year. So debt's at 100% of GDP roughly when the Tories left office. Instead of trying to consolidate the public finances and fix them, Labour in some senses has doubled down. That budget on the 31st of October, massive increases in taxation. Taxation was already at a 70-year high. They've increased taxation a lot. They've increased government spending a lot. And Rachel Reeves' narrative has been, it's okay because this government spending is going to lead to faster growth, and that faster growth will help to fix the public finances in the way I just described, by generating more tax revenue, by naturally bringing about a slowdown in government spending as the economy needs less support. But guess what? Rachel Reeves' announcements have not engendered growth. On the contrary, they've killed growth stone dead. Why? Because instead of using the borrowing to put into infrastructure projects and other things that you could say, well, there might be some growth from that, she's just bunged a load of the money to the public sector unions and a massive pay rise. She spent a lot of money on other unproductive causes, which are nice for Labour's favoured interest groups, but won't generate growth. So what's happening here, Mark, is that international capital markets have pushed up the price of government borrowing, and that price of government borrowing is the benchmark against which mortgages, personal loans, your car loan, if a company wants to raise money for a corporate loan to build a new factory, it isn't the Bank of England's interest rates that we focus on the evening news that are the important thing. It's the market interest rate. And what's happening now is that the market interest rate has been pushed up from below 4% at the time of mid-September in the run-up to that budget on Halloween, and they're now been pushing 5%. And that is the highest for several decades. And it's way higher than when Liz Truss apparently, quotes, crashed the economy back in September and October 2022.
Now, before we carry on, to watch the whole show ad-free, head to The Mark Dolan Show on the Substack app or go to markdolan.com.
Yet back then, the media went ballistic. Back then, she was forced out of office. Now we have even higher borrowing costs, even more damage being done to the economy.
Lower growth.
Lower growth. And yet, no one is saying, Rachel Reeves, why are you still in office? Keir Starmer, why are you still in office? But guess what? What's happening now, Mark, and a lot of, the kind of people that tap into your journalism, they're going to be smart people. People literally come up to me in the pub and talk to me about this stuff. It's arcane, but a lot of people are getting their head around it because it's really, really important to the cost of living and everyone's loans and the way the economy runs. What's happening now, Mark, and this is what's really worrying, is over the last few months, as the Bank of England has been lowering its base rate from 5.25% down to 4.75% in 2 steps of 0.25 percentage point each time. The Bank of England has lowered interest rates by 0.5 percentage point over the last 6 months or so. And yet the markets have said, no, we don't believe that. We're putting rates up, mate. And guess what? When you've got a bunch of economists sitting in the Bank of England versus financial markets, the markets always win.
Well, that's right. Financiers don't trust Britain anymore, and they don't trust Labour. It's amazing to think that the cost of borrowing is cheaper for Italy, which has a debt
Greece.
of 140% of its economy, and Greece as well, which apparently is the basket case of Europe. It is a deep concern. Now, isn't the truth, Liam, that the real remedy is something that Labour cannot administer, which is to drastically cut public spending?
Well, not to gainsay you, Mark, in any way, I wouldn't say the markets don't trust Britain anymore. It's not that the British government isn't going to pay back its debt. It's not like there's going to be what we call a sovereign default, the sort of thing that has happened over the years in far-flung emerging markets. Though it must be said, in our lifetimes, back in 1976, we're older than we look, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
Not only did Southampton beat Man United in the Cup final in 1976, Bobby Stokes scored the goal. What also happened is the British government did actually have to be bailed out. Of course, in the middle of a big spending, high taxing Labour government by the International Monetary Fund. We're not at that point yet. But what is the case is that in order to lend to the British government, the markets are charging much, much more. And that means that the debt service bill, the amount of taxpayer money and new borrowing that is channeled into paying the interest on the old borrowing has gone up drastically. It was, this time last year, about £80 billion a year. That's absolutely massive. That's twice the defence budget. We're now heading for a situation where in this fiscal year, the debt service bill is likely to be 110, 120 billion pounds a year. That's absolutely enormous amounts of money. It's way more than we spend on education as the state, just on servicing the interest on our debt. So when the markets push up borrowing costs, the way we pay the interest on the old debt is we borrow money to pay the interest on the old debt. You roll over the debt, right? Yeah, apparently this is how Western economies are meant to be run these days. And so Rachel Reeves' sums are all obliterated because any idea of fiscal headroom, the amount of slack in the public finances, of course, is completely decapitated. There is no fiscal headroom. Why? Because the markets are demanding more to lend money to the government. And Rachel Reeves has just jetted off to China, right? Let me say, that is a deeply irresponsible thing to do. Because what the financial markets want to see is that she's not going off on some, ego-boosting, handshaking, photo-bagging tour of China. They want to know that she's in there, in the political salons, talking to unions, making statements saying, you know what, we get it. We got to rein this in. My growth plan isn't working, and here is my new plan. But she's not doing any of those things. She's basically getting people out on the airwaves who are talking nonsense by saying, oh, it's nothing, it's fine, normal market conditions, it's fine. It isn't fine at all, and it hasn't been fine for many, many months, as some of us have been pointing out repeatedly, because you've got the market pushing rates up just as the Bank of England is pulling rates down. That never ends well.
Briefly, Liam, because I know you've got to go. Keir Starmer is ruthless. Is it possible that he could sack his chancellor if things get worse?
Well, if he is going to approach this entirely as a political issue, then he will. If he's going to be like a student politician, then he will. But I would say if he actually sacks Rachel Reeves, the markets could panic even more. Right. What he should do is get in a room with Rachel Reeves and then make a joint statement that, we get it. We get it. Our big spending, big taxing, big borrowing plans are not engendering growth, because they're not. And this is how we plan to mend our ways. And it will be in a lower trajectory of spending. It will be in freeing up the economy, deregulating the economy, supply side policies, as we call them, getting the economy to work better, stripping away regulation to get growth going. What we don't need is yet more borrowing, pretending it's going to be spent on things that are instantly going to create growth. Look at the amount of money the government spent on HS2. Oh, where's the growth from HS2? There isn't any, because it's a useless project. So the thing is, when governments in general borrow money and spend money and say that's going to generate growth, it pretty much never does. And yet it seems to me that so many Labour governments have to learn this lesson over and over and over again. To their credit, Tony Blair and even Gordon Brown got this, because they had around them serious people, serious economists who understand what I'm saying and were in the room when the political decisions are made and could push back against the mad politics. Of course we can just borrow and spend. Keir Starmer's Labour Party don't have that. They're more ideological, they're more closely guarded, and there is no one at the top of this Labour government or around the top of this Labour government who really gets financial markets. If they were there, I would know them, and I don't.
Crumbs. Socialism, the failed idea that never dies. Bring back Liz Truss. All is forgiven. Liam Halligan, what a treat to have you on the show. Come back soon. My thanks to the renowned Telegraph columnist and co-host of the very popular Planet Normal podcast, Liam Halligan. Thanks, Liam. Check out the full episode here.